Alright, well, my editing skills are crap, but can the same thing be said about Pacific Rim Uprising? Stick around and find out. Anybody guess what that one is? It has something to do with giant robots. And the lyrics are in Japanese, so I couldn't sing them, but that's the closest I could think of something that would thematically fit with this review. Anyway, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com, and this is my uncut review of Pacific Rim Uprising. The synopsis on IMDb reads, Jake Pentecost, son of Stacker Pentecost, reunites with Mako Mori, or is it Mako? I don't remember what her name sounded like when it was said out loud. I'm going to say Mako Mori to lead a new generation of Jaeger pilots, including rival Lambert and 15-year-old hacker Amara against a new kaiju threat. I don't think you really need to have seen the first one in order to jump on board for this. You're just going to either accept the setting or not. If you're into the setting of giant monsters fighting giant mechs, then, you know, you don't need... there's a narration at the beginning that just kind of gets you caught up, and the status quo has changed enough that it feels a bit like a new beginning. So you really don't have to have seen the first one. That said, you know, I think that there's maybe some benefit to seeing it. And if you haven't and you enjoyed this one, then definitely go back and watch that first one. Anyway, let me talk a little bit about the story, the script, the pacing, just the general tone. I would describe this largely as a light-toned action sci-fi movie. It's very much in line with the current tone made popular by Marvel movies and that has now seemingly been adopted by Star Wars: The Last Jedi. Characters are all just a bit exaggerated with performances that kind of match that. There's a lot of dialogue, logistics, and character choices that wouldn't make sense to me in the real world. I found myself asking, why would they do that? Or why would he say that? Or why? And I just had to let go of that and just kind of accept, okay, this is just that kind of movie. You know, an example would be the hero kind of standing and looking cool as enemies shoot at him, you know, confident that they're going to miss because this door is kind of closing on them in the process. I'd be like, dude, even if that door is closing on them, why are you standing there looking cool? Get out of the way. That's just one. That's just one. There's lots of little things like that all over the place. Another example would be neglecting to test some tech functionality before taking it into the field. And it's not this. It wasn't the situation where it was like, oh my gosh, you know, the aliens are attacking. We got to get out there now. We can't wait to test this. No, it was like, okay, we're gonna go out and do this standard thing. I hope this works out. This tech hasn't been tested yet. And I'm like, what? It wasn't so standard that like it wouldn't still be important to kind of test the functionality of this tech out. Anyway, and it was more about not just the functionality of the tech, but the compatibility of the pilots. If you're familiar with the first movie, then that was the issue at hand. If you're not familiar with the first movie, then just the compatibility of the pilots with the technology that they're using. Anyway, let's see here. It's a choice, really, I think, of style over realism that, you know, sometimes in a different style and with different elements of realism being neglected, I can totally be on board for, you know. I am a fan of Zack Snyder movies, and certainly there's a lot of style going on there, and sometimes realism gets ejected for that. But it's, for me, as for anybody, we all kind of have our desire for selective realism. There's things that we selectively want to feel more realistic to us, and we're willing to let go of a lot of other things. And so for whatever reason, this cocktail of elements wasn't working for me because I wanted some different things to be treated in a more realistic manner than they were. But I do think that a lot of people are likely to connect with this movie and its tone, but that's just not the case for me. For me, a lot of the dialogue that went for melodrama just felt like stumbling cliche, and the jokes felt like obligations that were inserted into the script. As far as the cast goes, this has been the case for me a lot lately. I felt like the cast was pretty solid, but also wasn't given material to work with that provided much challenge or opportunity for nuance and subtext. Okay, the stunts and visuals, gotta say something about that. Lots of CG, and my cursed eyes pick out CG just like, I hate it. I hate it. But, you know, I can also accept that and go into a movie and say, all right, it's just going to look like cartoons and that's fine, you know. And this wasn't, you know, as bad as some CG is to my eyes in other movies. And if you come for the giant mechs fighting giant monsters experience, you're going to get a ton of bang for your buck in this. Giant mechs and giant monsters, or the two things fighting each other, isn't really my kind of genre. I'm open to it, but as I was watching the visuals, I was like, hey, can someone make the game? I think I would be more invested in what was going on if I was controlling things, you know? And I like conceptually some things about giant monsters, and especially giant mechs, but I kind of want to be simulating being in the pilot seat a little bit more instead of just watching the action happening in a story that I'm not connecting with. But even so, I enjoyed some of the action visuals in the second half. You know, it was cool to see what weird things the enemy could do near the climax, and the mechs each had kind of their specialties as well. So although I wasn't invested in the action, it was still visually interesting to see how it unfolded in the last 30 minutes of the movie. Okay, so I always try to ask myself, is there anything of worthwhile moral, philosophical, spiritual significance going on in the theme of this thing that I'm taking in that might stimulate worthwhile thought or conversation? Despite this movie being pretty forgettable to me, its central theme is one that is so important, I think, for everyone to remember, and that we, as Christian geeks, often forget. The main character, about halfway through the movie, tells a younger trainee, this is pretty close to the quote, I might be getting it just a little bit off, but pretty darn close. He says, "Don't let what other people think of you define who you are. You won't like what happens if you go down that path." Let me say that again. Don't let what other people think of you define who you are. You won't like what happens if you go down that path. There was more than one character in this movie that was struggling against what people thought of them. And they might have been telling themselves, I don't care what people think, and raging against those opinions that were being expressed about them. They might have been kind of raging in rebellion against those things, and yet those opinions were still clearly having an effect on them, having an effect on their emotions, having an effect on their outlook on life, having an effect on what they were prioritizing in their life and making their lives about. And this theme was restated in a slightly modified way near the climax of the movie as well. So it definitely came out to me as like, okay, this is, if anything, the theme of the movie. It is frustrating to me how much weight I give to the words of other people. And their opinions about me, their thoughts about me, or whatever. If you asked me on a written exam, I'd tell you that the Bible is my ultimate source of truth, and it defines my outlook on life. And in many cases, that's true in how it plays out in my life. But I still struggle and often fail to remember what God says and value what He says more than what other people say or might be thinking about me. If you and I don't constantly guard against it, we will allow the opinions of our parents, our co-workers, our friends, or people online to dictate how we order our lives, what we spend our time thinking about. We will strive for some measure of success defined by the people we know. We'll lose sleep or have a weekend spoiled as we wait for some email response from somebody. We'll choose to reject jobs or even churches based on goals that will not satisfy us when we achieve them, or that will even be unreachable because they're so vaguely defined. We might tell ourselves and everyone else, as some of these characters kind of did in this movie, that we don't care about what other people think of us. And yet, we still so easily allow the opinions of others to influence our goals and our entire outlook on life, how we order our lives. And to the degree we go down that path, we will see our lives get completely screwed up. That message was something that I needed to hear this week, and I'm pretty sure that I'm not alone in that. Now, as for recommendations, well, I have no idea what your tastes are in movies, but if I were a time traveler, I would go back in time and say, Peter, skip this one. If it's ever on Amazon Prime or somewhere else, you don't have to pay any extra for it, Put it on while you play a video game or do some cleaning. You'll like watching some of the visuals, but you won't want to devote your full time, attention, or certainly any money to watching this movie. That said, if a third movie gets made and the trailers look good, give this one a watch to prep for that third one, because the hints at the end of this movie indicate that a third movie could go in a pretty interesting direction. It's rated PG-13 for sequences of sci-fi, violence, and action, and some language. Alright, those are my thoughts. I'd love to get yours in the comments below. Please consider supporting this channel by becoming a Spirit Blade Insider, which grants you exclusive monthly behind-the-scenes content. For more info, you can go to our About page at spiritblade.com, and at spiritblade.com you'll also find our audio dramas and our weekly podcast. Finally, there's a ton more content and community over at christiangeekcentral.com, so I hope you'll join us there soon as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. Hey, just a reminder that this humble little YouTube channel is so dependent on people just like you. There are 3 main ways you can support this channel, and they're all over at spiritblade.com. The first is to purchase one of our sci-fi or fantasy audio dramas. Second is to give us a donation of any amount. And third, you can become a Spirit Blade Insider and get access to exclusive behind-the-scenes monthly goodies. You can get more information on our About page over at spiritblade.com. Thanks so much.